In the summer of 2022, the city of Mykolaiv was dying, not dramatically, not in the way that cities die in movies, all at once, in a single catastrophic moment, but slowly, relentlessly, in the specific, grinding way that war kills cities from the inside out, one essential system at a time. The water was gone. That sounds like a small thing until you think about what it means. No running water means no drinking, no cooking, no toilets, no washing wounds, no hospitals functioning normally, no fire suppression, no industry, no normal human life of any description. The Russian military had struck Mykolaiv's water supply system early and precisely, a deliberate military tactic designed to make the city uninhabitable. And it was working. By mid-2022, Mykolaiv's remaining population, hundreds of thousands of people who had stayed through the shelling and the occupation of surrounding territories, were queuing for water tankers, collecting rainwater, surviving on what international organizations could deliver in bottles. The electricity was unreliable. The heating infrastructure was destroyed. Schools were shuttered. Businesses were closed or rubble. The city's shipbuilding industry, once a cornerstone of the Soviet and then Ukrainian economy, the reason the city existed at its current size, was silent. Mykolaiv, Ukraine's 9th largest city, a Black Sea port city of over 500,000 people, was becoming a ghost town even before the shooting stopped. And then, on March 29th, 2022, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky stood before the Danish parliament in Copenhagen, not physically, but via video link, and asked a small Nordic country of 6 million people to do something unprecedented. He asked Denmark to adopt Mykolaiv, not in a symbolic way, not with a strongly worded resolution and a modest donation. He asked Denmark to take on special patronage over the reconstruction of an entire Ukrainian city, to commit its expertise, its companies, its government resources, and its long-term attention to rebuilding something that had been systematically destroyed. Denmark said yes. What happened next is one of the most remarkable stories of international solidarity, practical reconstruction, and hard-won hope that the war in Ukraine has produced. This is that story. To understand what was destroyed, you need to understand what existed before. Mykolaiv, the name means City of St. Nicholas in Ukrainian, sits at the confluence of two rivers, the Southern Bug and the Ingo, close to where they meet the Black Sea. It is the kind of city that exists because of geography, a place where water routes converge, where ships were built and launched and repaired, where the maritime economy created communities and industries and a particular culture. Founded by the Russian Empire in 1789, Mykolaiv was for most of its history a major center of shipbuilding. Soviet-era Mykolaiv built some of the largest warships in the Soviet fleet, aircraft carriers, cruisers, destroyers. The city's identity was inseparable from the sea and from the engineering culture that the shipbuilding industry produced. Engineers, sailors, industrial workers, a specific working-class intelligentsia that the Ukrainian South is known for. By 2022, Mykolaiv had a population of about 476,000. It was not the most famous Ukrainian city, not Kiev with its golden domes, not Lviv with its Austro-Hungarian architecture, not Odessa with its literary history and legendary nightlife. But it was a real city, with real people living real lives. Families, schools, universities, restaurants, the ordinary daily texture of a Ukrainian city in the early 21st century. It was also strategically critical. Mykolaiv sits as a gateway to Odessa, the largest port on the Black Sea, Ukraine's maritime lifeline. If Russia could take Mykolaiv, the path to Odessa was open. If Odessa fell, Ukraine was effectively landlocked. The Ukrainian military understood this. The city's defenders understood this. And the citizens who stayed through the worst of the shelling, who kept queuing for water and sheltering in basements and refusing to abandon their homes even as missiles fell, understood this too. Mykolaiv held, but the holding came at a price. What did the Russians destroy in Mykolaiv? The answer is almost everything that keeps a modern city alive. The water supply system was the first and most critical target. Mykolaiv's water infrastructure had been built primarily in the Soviet era, a complex network of pipes, pumping stations, and treatment facilities that drew water from the Southern Bug River and distributed it across the city. The Russians struck the main water intake facility early in the war. They struck pumping stations. They struck distribution infrastructure. The result was that a city of nearly 500,000 people had virtually no running water for extended periods. Think about what no running water means in a hospital, in a maternity ward, in a kitchen, in a school. The absence of water is not an inconvenience. It is an existential threat to human health and to the functioning of every institution that makes a city. The heating system. Mykolaiv's district heating infrastructure, the Soviet-era system of centralized heating that provided warmth to apartment buildings across the city, was struck repeatedly. Substations destroyed. Pipes damaged. In a city that experiences cold winters, destroyed heating infrastructure is not merely uncomfortable. It is a health emergency. The electricity grid, transformers, substations, transmission lines, all targeted. The combination of destroyed heating and destroyed electricity creates living conditions that force residents to choose between freezing and leaving. Housing. Thousands of apartment buildings, private homes, and commercial buildings damaged or destroyed by shelling and missile strikes. The Lisky neighborhood. The Korabelnyi district. Street after street of residential buildings with gaping holes where missiles entered. Roofs collapsed. Windows blown out. Walls reduced to rubble. Schools and social infrastructure. Hospitals, schools, kindergartens, the institutions that define a functioning community, damaged and in some cases destroyed. By the end of 2022, the Ukrainian government estimated that Mykolaiv had sustained billions of dollars in damage. The reconstruction cost for the city alone was staggering, and the war was not over. New damage was being added continuously. This was what Denmark had agreed to help fix, while the shooting was still happening. The idea that produced the Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership was one of the most creative diplomatic initiatives to emerge from the Ukraine war. Zelensky called it special patronage. The concept was simple in its logic and remarkable in its ambition. Ukraine was going to need an enormous amount of outside help to rebuild. The scale of destruction, eventually estimated at $524 billion across the country, exceeded what any single international organization or aid mechanism could address comprehensively. And the history of post-conflict reconstruction was full of examples of aid that arrived slowly, was poorly coordinated, failed to match local needs, or disappeared into corruption. What if, instead of all donors contributing to a general fund that was distributed centrally, specific countries took specific responsibility for specific places? A sort of international piecemeal adoption of Ukraine to concentrate foreign investments according to nationality. The countries of Europe and beyond would each take on a Ukrainian city, region, or sector. They would bring not just money but expertise, relationships, companies, technical knowledge, and long-term commitment. The reconstruction would be more personalized, more accountable, more likely to actually produce results. At the first international conference for the reconstruction of Ukraine in Lugano in July 2022, Prime Minister Danish presented a map with the assignment of Ukrainian cities and regions to various Western countries. The concept attracted attention. Multiple countries expressed interest, but then something happened that Zelensky and his team had perhaps not expected. This approach was then completely abandoned, with the sole exception of Denmark, which confirmed that it wanted to concentrate the work of Danish companies on Mykolaiv. Everyone else stepped back. Denmark stepped forward. Why? Denmark is a small country, 6 million people, a land area roughly the size of the American state of West Virginia, a NATO member, a European Union member, a prosperous social democracy with a strong maritime tradition, a sophisticated development aid sector, and a political culture that has, since the Cold War ended, developed a strong commitment to what Danish foreign policy calls international activism. But why Mykolaiv specifically? Why Denmark specifically? Denmark has decided to play this important role also due to the country's maritime tradition. In effect, it would allow Denmark to facilitate a special relationship with a Black Sea port for its operations. The maritime connection. Denmark has one of the world's largest shipping industries. Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, is Danish. The relationship between a northern European maritime nation and a Black Sea port city with a shipbuilding tradition was not accidental. It was a strategic fit. There was also a moral dimension that resonated specifically with Danish political culture. The conviction led the majority of political parties in Denmark to forge a cross-party agreement on defense in April 2024, enabling the country to reach the 2% of GDP threshold for defense spending within the same year. The Russian invasion struck something deep in Danish political consciousness. Denmark is a country that was itself occupied by Nazi Germany during World War II. The memory of occupation and the memory of solidarity and resistance is not abstract in Danish political culture. It is personal, generational, woven into the national narrative. When Zelensky addressed the Danish parliament in March 2022 and asked for help with Mykolaiv, he was asking a country whose political identity included a particular sensitivity to what it means to have your sovereignty violated by a larger neighbor. And the Danish response was not the hesitant, qualified, risk-calculated response of government primarily focused on minimizing exposure. It was immediate, committed, and, as it turned out, sustained beyond what almost anyone would have predicted at the outset. Mayor of Mykolaiv, Alexander Sinkovic, said in a television interview that Ukrainians see Denmark as a perfect partner for cooperation. We see Mykolaiv as the new Copenhagen of the future. The new Copenhagen. On the Black Sea, that vision, ambitious, specific, human, became a frame for everything that followed. When Denmark committed to Mykolaiv, the first and most urgent problem was the water. A city without water cannot be reconstructed. You cannot build housing for returning residents if there is no water in the buildings. You cannot run a hospital. You cannot convince people to come back. Water was a foundation on which every other element of reconstruction depended. With the support of Denmark and other partners, water purification equipment was delivered, and since January 2025 construction has been underway on a new 67-kilometer pipeline from Novo Odessa to Mykolaiv, a 67-kilometer pipeline. Think about the scale of that. A pipeline stretching the length of 2 marathons, built in a country that is still at war, connecting a new water source to a damaged city to give its people back the most basic thing. As part of this investment project, valued at approximately 132 million euros, Denmark committed to replacing approximately 45 kilometers of the most severely damaged parts of the municipal water system and fully rebuilding it in one of the city's most densely populated and industrialized districts. The project is scheduled for completion by the end of 2025. 45 kilometers of municipal water pipes in the middle of a war, under the threat of further strikes. Denmark also delivered water purification equipment in the immediate emergency phase, not waiting for the big infrastructure projects to be designed and funded, but getting basic water treatment capacity into Mykolaiv while the longer-term work was being planned. The Danish Refugee Council opened an office in Mykolaiv and provided water treatment plants and basic building materials to help support a citizenry exhausted by war and shorn of financial resources. This combination, immediate emergency response combined with long-term infrastructure investment, became the Danish model. Don't choose between the immediate and the strategic. Do both simultaneously. It will become a defining characteristic of Denmark's approach to Mykolaiv. In October 2023, Denmark did something that no other country had done. Denmark plans to open an embassy office in Mykolaiv in October 2023, the first country to do so. The first country to open a diplomatic office in a frontline Ukrainian city that was still being shelled. This was not a symbolic gesture. It was a strategic statement of intent. It said, "We are not doing this from a safe distance. We are not sending money and consultants and leaving. We are here. We have people in the city. We are accountable to the people we are trying to help." The head of the office of the Royal Danish Embassy in Mykolaiv, Jacob Hansen, became a real presence in the city. He gave interviews to local media. He talked about specific neighborhoods being rebuilt. He spoke about the security risks and the reasons for accepting them. We understand that there's a security risk, but on the other hand, our priority is for people to return to the city and to have a place to live, because we understand that the situation with housing is currently difficult. There is simply not enough housing for people. An ambassador's representative in a frontline city talking about housing for ordinary people. This is not the language of distant donor bureaucracy. This is a language of someone who is present, who knows the city, who has built relationships with the people who live and work there. The embassy office created something that money alone cannot create: accountability. When you have people on the ground, you know whether the work is actually being done. You know whether the money is being spent on what it was supposed to be spent on. You know when something is going wrong, and you can respond faster. The decision to be physically present in Mykolaiv, while the war was ongoing, while missiles were still falling, was a decision that distinguished Denmark's approach from that of every other donor country. One of the most persistent fears about Ukraine reconstruction has been corruption. Ukraine has a documented history of corruption in its public procurement and infrastructure sectors. The billions of dollars flowing in for reconstruction represent an extraordinary opportunity for those who would divert them. The international community, donors, aid organizations, Western governments, has been acutely aware of this risk from the beginning. Denmark addressed it directly, and in doing so, created something that Ukrainian officials themselves are holding up as a model. The reconstruction plan for the city of Mykolaiv could become an anti-corruption model for all other Ukrainian cities, as the municipality of Mykolaiv partners with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and Denmark. How? Mykolaiv has become an integrity city of the EUACI with the aim to develop best practices in this area. The European Union Anti-Corruption Initiative, Mykolaiv, with Danish support and pressure, became the first Ukrainian city designated as an integrity city under this program, committing to specific transparency standards, procurement processes, and accountability mechanisms as a condition of receiving reconstruction funding. Denmark focused in particular on promoting integrity, transparency, and accountability of the reconstruction aid. This is not just about preventing theft. It is about building a system, creating processes that can be verified, documented, and replicated, establishing that receiving international reconstruction money comes with specific obligations around how it is managed. The significance of this is enormous. If Mykolaiv can demonstrate that a heavily damaged Ukrainian city can receive hundreds of millions of dollars in international aid and rebuild with documented transparency, then the model exists. It can be scaled. It can be applied to Kharkiv, to Mariupol, if it is ever recovered, to the hundreds of smaller Ukrainian cities and towns that need to be rebuilt. Ukraine's Minister for Communities and Territorial Development, Oleksiy Kuleba, echoed this view and thanked Denmark for high-quality and substantial cooperation with the Mykolaiv region. High-quality and substantial, two words that do not often appear together in the history of post-conflict international reconstruction. Among the most moving dimensions of the Mykolaiv reconstruction is what is happening to the schools. In May 2024, $17.2 million was allocated to rebuild destroyed educational institutions in the Mykolaiv region. Schools, not just buildings. The institutions that make it possible for children who have lived through war to be children again. The structures that say to families, it is safe to stay here. It is possible to have a future here. The Mykolaiv Lyceum, one of Mykolaiv's most significant educational buildings, is being rebuilt with Danish support while preserving its authentic appearance. The ambassador supported the idea of creating a Danish quarter or park in Mykolaiv as a permanent marker of the partnership. The attention to authenticity is significant. Not just rebuild what it looked like before, preserve the architectural identity. The message to residents: we are not replacing your city with something generic. We are restoring your city, the one that was yours. This matters psychologically in ways that go beyond the practical. Displaced residents who return to find buildings they recognize, their school, their neighborhood, their street, are more likely to stay, more likely to feel that return is possible, more likely to invest in the city's future themselves. The Danish approach understood this from the beginning. Reconstruction is not just engineering. It is psychology. It is the restoration of a sense of continuity between the city that existed before the war and the city that will exist after. The children of Mykolaiv who had their education disrupted, who spent months in basements, who followed lessons online while sirens wailed, who watched their school buildings damaged or destroyed. They are the future of the city. And Denmark's investment in their schools is an investment in that future with a specificity and humanity that a pure infrastructure budget cannot capture. Here is something remarkable about the Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership. Denmark did not just commit to rebuilding what existed before. It committed to rebuilding better, specifically greener. Denmark has pledged to co-finance a new wind power plant, one of the largest reconstruction projects planned in Ukraine, with an estimated cost of approximately 400 million euros. The investment is expected to be operational by the end of 2026. A 400 million euro wind power plant in a country that is still at war. Denmark is a country that invented offshore wind energy as a large-scale industry. Danish companies dominate the global wind energy sector in ways that are comparable to how American companies dominate technology. When Denmark brings wind energy expertise to Mykolaiv, it is not bringing a generic reconstruction technology. It is bringing what may be the world's deepest expertise in a specific field directly relevant to Ukraine's reconstruction needs. Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been systematically targeted by Russia throughout the war. Power plants, substations, transmission lines, struck repeatedly, repaired, struck again. The vulnerability of centralized energy infrastructure to missile attack has been one of the defining features of the war's effect on Ukrainian civilian life. Distributed renewable energy, wind turbines spread across a region, generating power locally, less dependent on centralized transmission infrastructure that is an easy missile target, is not just environmentally preferable, it is strategically more resilient. Denmark's commitment to building a wind power plant in Mykolaiv is simultaneously a reconstruction investment, an energy security investment, and a statement about what the future of Ukrainian energy should look like. Denmark has also pledged support for substations for the district heating system, solar power installations, and the restoration of water infrastructure, creating what Danish officials describe as a green recovery framework for city. In 2025, Denmark launched its largest initiative to date, the Ukraine Transition Program, to continue backing Ukraine's green recovery, energy security, and reforms on the path toward the EU. Green recovery, energy security, EU reforms. The Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership is not rebuilding the Soviet-era city. It is building the European city that Mykolaiv can become. Let's talk about the numbers, because the numbers are extraordinary for a country of 6 million people. According to the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, as of February 25, 2025, Copenhagen has allocated approximately 190 million euros in aid from Mykolaiv. This amount constitutes 60% of all funds earmarked thus far for Ukraine's reconstruction, in line with the objectives of the Danish Fund for Ukraine launched in March 2023. 190 million euros for one city. For a city that Denmark has no historical connection to, no diaspora relationship with, no economic dependency on. But the numbers go larger. After already investing more than 150 million euros in the reconstruction of Mykolaiv, Denmark is preparing to step up its support for the region. In 2025, it launched its largest initiative to date, the Ukraine Transition Program, with a budget of DKK 2.8 billion, covering the time period July 2025 to June 2028. DKK 2.8 billion, approximately 375 million euros, over 3 years, with about 60%, 225 million euros, going to Mykolaiv and the Mykolaiv region. To put this in context, Denmark is a country of 6 million people. 375 million euro over 3 years for Ukraine reconstruction works out to approximately 62 euros per Danish citizen per year. Every man, woman, and child in Denmark contributing the equivalent of a decent restaurant dinner every year to rebuilding Ukrainian city. And the reconstruction money is separate from Denmark's military support, which is by far the larger commitment. Since the outbreak of the war, Danish support to Ukraine amounts to approximately 9 billion euros in military support. 9 billion euros. From a country of 6 million people. On a per capita basis, Denmark has been one of the most generous supporters of Ukraine of any country in the world. And uniquely among major donors, it has concentrated a substantial portion of its civilian reconstruction funding on a single, specific, identifiable place. Numbers and infrastructure are important, but the story of Mykolaiv's reconstruction is ultimately a story about people. The people who stayed when most of their neighbors left. The people who kept showing up for work at the water utility, the hospital, the bakery, even when missiles were falling. the people who formed community organizations to help their neighbors survive the water crisis, the people who maintained, through 2 years of war, the social fabric that makes a city more than a collection of buildings, and the people who are coming back. One of the key indicators that Danish and Ukrainian officials track is the population of Mykolaiv, a city whose population has returned, whose residents feel safe enough and optimistic enough about the future comeback, is a city that is truly recovering. Jacob Hansen, head of the office of the Royal Danish Embassy in Mykolaiv, articulated this directly. The priority is for people to return to the city, because without people, the infrastructure being built is infrastructure for ghosts. The water project, the schools, the housing restoration, all of it is simultaneously practical reconstruction and a signal to displace Mykolaiv. It is becoming possible to come back. There will be water in your apartment. There will be electricity. There will be a school for your children. There will be a future here. The UNDP Mykolaiv Strategic Partnership Project, funded by Denmark with a total budget of over $36 million, has as its main objective to normalize life for the local population, facilitate the reintegration of the displaced population, and address the specific needs of vulnerable people. Normalize life. Those two words contain an entire vision of what Reconstruction is for. Not just rebuild the buildings. Normalize life. Create conditions in which ordinary people can live ordinary lives again. The Mykolaiv Reconstruction has generated significant learning about what effective reconstruction in an active conflict zone actually looks like. The lessons are being studied by other countries, by international organizations, and by the Ukrainian government itself. Lesson 1. Start before the shooting stops. The reconstruction cannot wait for the war to end. As Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs Lars Løkke Rasmussen emphasized in an early October announcement, the reconstruction of Ukraine cannot wait for the war to end. This is counterintuitive. The instinct is to wait for stability before building, to avoid the risk that what you build will simply be destroyed again. But the evidence from Mykolaiv suggests the opposite logic. When people see reconstruction happening during the war, they believe recovery is possible. They stay or they come back. The city remains alive. The social and institutional fabric is preserved. Lesson 2. Concentrated, long-term commitment outperforms dispersed, short-term giving. The Danish model, one country, one city, sustained over years, has produced more tangible results than the dispersed, short-term approach that characterizes much international humanitarian aid. Lesson 3. Physical presence matters. The Danish embassy office in Mykolaiv is not just symbolically important. It changes the quality of the work. Having people on the ground who know the city, know the officials, know the specific needs and specific challenges. This creates a different relationship between donor and recipient than any amount of remote assistance can replicate. Lesson 4. Anti-corruption infrastructure must be built in from the beginning. Denmark's insistence on the Integrity City framework as a condition of funding was not just about preventing theft. It was about building the institutional capacity that Ukraine will need for all of its reconstruction and for its path toward EU membership. Lesson 5. Match expertise to needs. Denmark's maritime tradition, its wind energy industry, its water management expertise. These are not generic development aid capabilities. They are specific skills that map onto Mykolaiv's specific needs in ways that made the partnership unusually productive. We see Mykolaiv as the new Copenhagen of the future. This vision, stated by Mykolaiv's mayor, embraced by Danish officials, is both inspiring and challenging to take seriously. Copenhagen is a city of 800,000 in a prosperous, stable Nordic democracy, a city famous for its cycling infrastructure, its sustainable architecture, its design culture, its quality of life rankings that consistently put among the most livable cities in the world. Mykolaiv is a Black Sea port city that has been shelled for 2 years and is still being bombed. And yet the vision is not entirely fantastical. Denmark's ambassador also supported the idea of creating a Danish quarter or park in Mykolaiv. He also stated his vision for the post-war reconstruction of Mykolaiv with pedestrian-friendly conditions and bicycle infrastructure. Denmark would help Mykolaiv restore and modernize its shipbuilding facilities after the end of the full-scale war. Pedestrian-friendly streets, bicycle infrastructure, a modernized shipbuilding industry, a Danish quarter. green energy from a wind power plant, modernized water infrastructure, rebuilt schools with preserved facades, an integrity city with European standard procurement. This is not the Soviet city that existed before the war. This is a blueprint for a genuinely different kind of city. A city that would, if this vision is realized, be more livable, more sustainable, more European, more connected to the global economy than Mykolaiv it was before the war. There is something deeply human and deeply defined about this. Russia bombed Mykolaiv in an attempt to reduce it to rubble and make it uninhabitable. The Danish response is, we will rebuild it, and we will build it into something better than it was. The city that Russia tried to destroy will emerge from its rubble not as a wounded version of its former self, but as something that could not have existed without the Reconstruction, not the new Copenhagen, but perhaps a Mykolaiv that shares something with Copenhagen, something about the relationship between people in their city, something about the quality of daily life, something about what it means to be a European city in the 21st century. The Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership began as a bilateral experiment, a small country taking on a specific city, a test of whether the patron model could work. By 2025, the results were visible enough that Denmark decided to scale up. Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for Reconstruction, Oleksiy Kuleba, said, "We already have positive experience working with Denmark in Mykolaiv." Today, this format is being scaled to the national level. Over the next 3 years, millions of Ukrainians will see tangible results. The $375 million Ukraine Transition Program, Denmark's largest ever country program, extends a Mykolaiv approach across Ukraine, with 60% of the funding still going to Mykolaiv, but the remaining 40% supporting green recovery, energy security, and EU reform processes nationally. The Mykolaiv model had proven itself sufficiently to become the basis for national-level programming. This is not a small thing. International development programming is full of pilots that never scale, projects that work in one context but fail when applied elsewhere, models that look good in reports but don't survive contact with the messy reality of implementation at scale. The Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership worked well enough, was transparent enough, accountable enough, tangible enough in its results, that Denmark and Ukraine jointly decided to build on it rather than start fresh for the national program. The Mykolaiv model is becoming the Ukraine model, and the Ukraine model, if it works at scale, could become the global model for reconstruction in active conflict zones. This is not a simple success story. Reconstruction while a war is ongoing is not a success story with a clean ending. It is a work in progress, with real challenges that honest reporting requires acknowledging. The security situation remains dire. Mykolaiv continues to receive Russian missile and drone strikes. Infrastructure that has been repaired is being struck again. The water system that Denmark spent hundreds of millions rebuilding is vulnerable to the same kinds of strikes that destroyed the original system. Every major reconstruction project carries the risk of being destroyed before it's completed or immediately after. The population question remains unresolved. Mykolaiv's population is significantly lower than it was before the war. Hundreds of thousands of Mykolaiv are displaced. In Ukraine's western region, in Poland, in Germany, across Europe. Reconstruction creates the condition for return, but it does not guarantee return. People who have rebuilt their lives elsewhere, enrolled their children in new schools, found new jobs. They may not come back even when Mykolaiv is rebuilt. The anti-corruption framework is necessary but not sufficient. Mykolaiv's designation as an integrity city reflects genuine progress. But Ukraine's systemic corruption challenges are deep and long-standing. The integrity measures put in place with Danish support are meaningless if the broader Ukrainian institutional environment does not change. The funding gap is real and enormous. Denmark has committed hundreds of millions of euros. Other countries have contributed to Mykolaiv through various channels. But the total estimated reconstruction cost for the city alone is billions. The Danish commitment, impressive as it is, covers a fraction of what is ultimately needed. And the war continues. Every day that active combat continues is a day that new damage is being added to the reconstruction ledger. The contrast between Denmark and the rest of the world is worth examining. The patron city model was presented at Lugano in July 2022. Multiple countries expressed interest. The map was drawn up. Assignments were notionally made. This approach was then completely abandoned, with the sole exception of Denmark. Why? The reasons are multiple, and not entirely to the credit of the countries that stepped back. Risk aversion. Committing to a specific city in an active war zone means accepting responsibility for outcomes that cannot be fully controlled. If the city is struck again after you've rebuilt it, you are associated with a failure. If the money is misused, even if you've done everything right, you bear reputational risk, bureaucratic inertia. Bilateral country-level commitments of the kind Denmark may require political will, interagency coordination, and sustained attention. These are hard to maintain across changing governments, evolving priorities, and competing demands on foreign aid budgets. Lack of a specific emotional and political connection that Denmark had. The Danish parliament's particular resonance with Zelensky's appeal, rooted in Denmark's own experience of occupation, in its maritime identity, in its tradition of international activism, created a political dynamic that could not simply be replicated in countries without those specific features. The result is that Mykolaiv has Denmark, and most other damaged Ukrainian cities, for the most part, have general funds and dispersed bilateral aid that is harder to trace, harder to attribute, and harder to hold accountable. The lesson for the international community is clear. The patron model works. Denmark proved it. The question is whether other countries have the political will and the specific expertise to apply it to the other cities and regions of Ukraine that still need patrons. There is a dimension to Denmark's commitment to Mykolaiv that is not purely altruistic. Denmark would help Mykolaiv restore and modernize its shipbuilding facilities after the end of the full-scale war. Denmark has also expressed interest in privatizing the Mykolaiv alumina plant. A Black Sea port city with restored, modernized shipbuilding facilities. A Danish presence in the management of significant industrial assets. An embassy office in the city. A wind power plant with Danish involvement. An economy increasingly connected to Danish companies. Danish expertise, Danish capital. Denmark is not just doing good. It is also investing in a strategic relationship with a Black Sea city that, if Ukraine wins this war and joins the European Union, will be a significant node in the European economic network. This is not cynical. Sustainable international development has always involved aligning donor interests with recipient needs. The projects that work, the ones that last beyond the initial enthusiasm, that are maintained after the ribbon cutting, that produce genuine long-term impact, are the ones where the interests of both parties are genuinely served. Denmark's maritime industry and Ukraine's Black Sea shipbuilding tradition are a genuine strategic fit. The wind energy transition that Ukraine needs for its energy security and for its EU membership requirements is a genuine fit with Denmark's world-leading expertise. The anti-corruption, good governance framework that Denmark brings is a genuine fit with what Ukraine needs to become an EU member state. The mutual interest that underlies the Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership is part of why it has worked, and it is part of why it is likely to continue working beyond the end of the war. The new Copenhagen. Perhaps not quite, but something real, something lasting, something genuinely transformed. Behind every pipeline laid, every school rebuilt, every solar panel installed, there are people, Danish engineers and project managers who relocated to Mykolaiv, who work in a city that still receives missile strikes, who go to work every day in a country at war because they believe the work matters. Ukrainian engineers and construction workers who are building their city back while their country is being attacked, who weld pipes and repair substations while air raid sirens sound, and their colleagues are called up for military service. Local government officials, in the mayor's office, in the utility companies, in the district administrations, who are managing reconstruction projects while simultaneously managing the emergencies that each new Russian attack creates. The people of the Danish Refugee Council who set up the water treatment plants in the emergency phase. The UNDP staff who manage the strategic partnership. The United Nations Office for Project Services workers who oversee the housing reconstruction. And most of all, the people of Mykolaiv themselves. The elderly woman in the Lisky neighborhood who's returned to her apartment after it was repaired, who turns on the tap and gets water again for the first time in months, who has heat in winter for the first time in 2 years, The child in the rebuilt school. The teacher who stayed through the hardest months because someone had to teach and this city was their home. The engineer at the water utility who had been working 16-hour days for 2 years, keeping the city alive with equipment and expertise provided by partners they had never heard of before the war. These are the people the Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership is actually about, not the memoranda of understanding, not the pledge conferences, not the euro figures in the program documents, the tap that works, the classroom that is warm, the street that is lit, those things. We have come to the end of this story, or rather, to the end of this chapter of a story that is still being written in a city that is still at war by people who have not yet seen the ending they are working toward. What does the Denmark-Mykolaiv partnership mean? Not for Mykolaiv specifically. We have covered that in detail, but for the world. For how we think about international solidarity, post-conflict reconstruction, and what small countries can do when they commit to something with genuine conviction. It means that the patron model works. That concentrated, long-term, expert-matched, physically present support from a specific country for a specific place produces results that dispersed, general, remote aid does not. This is a lesson with implications for every future reconstruction challenge the world faces, and there will be many. It means that reconstruction during active conflict is possible. Not easy, not without risk, not guaranteed to produce results that survive the next missile strike, but possible. And the argument that you must wait for the shooting to stop before you build, an argument that consigns entire populations to years of preventable suffering, is an argument that Denmark's approach in Mykolaiv has comprehensively challenged. It means that a country of 6 million people can make a difference that the world's largest aid programs sometimes cannot. Not through scale alone. Denmark cannot outspend the World Bank or the EU, but through the specific qualities that large institutions struggle to replicate. Presence, accountability, expertise matching, long-term relationship, and the credibility that comes from physically being there. And it means something about Ukraine. Ukraine is a country that has been fighting for its survival for over 2 years. Its people have endured destruction on a scale that is difficult to fully comprehend. And through all of it, they have been building, not waiting for victory to begin the future. Building it, city by city, neighborhood by neighborhood, pipe by pipe, and classroom by classroom, with the help of partners like Denmark who were willing to make a real commitment to a real place. Zelensky's vision of the patron system was adopted, ultimately, by one country. But that one country showed what commitment looks like. And Mykolaiv, the city that was dying in the summer of 2022, that had no water and no heat and missiles falling on its residential neighborhoods, is alive, damaged, scarred, still at risk, still at war, but alive, rebuilding, looking toward a future that its mayor, with the specific audacity of a man who has decided to believe in something, calls the new Copenhagen of the Black Sea. Not because the suffering was worth it. Nothing could make that calculation balance. But because the people of Mykolaiv, with the people of Denmark beside them, decided that what was destroyed was not the final word. And they are proving it. One pipeline, one school, one wind turbine at a time.